Hey guys, tonight we're going on a journey through time to find out how women across the ancient world dealt with something that half the population has experienced every single month since the beginning of humanity, and yet, for most of history, almost nobody wrote down. Because the people doing the writing were men, and men, historically, preferred not to think about it, until, of course, they decided it was magic, or cursed, or both. Tonight, you are a woman. Specifically, you are a woman in ancient Egypt, roughly 3,000 years ago. You've got a fascinating culture, incredible architecture, and a civilization that's the envy of the known world. You also have your period, and there is no ibuprofen. There are no heating pads. There are no chocolate bars. There is no lying on the couch watching television because television is roughly 3 millennia away, and frankly, so is the couch. What you do have is a handful of papyrus, some dried grass, a vague sense that the moon is somehow responsible for all of this, and a society that believes your menstrual blood can either cure diseases or destroy entire harvests, depending on who you ask. So that's reassuring. But before we get into all of that, let's get you settled. Dim those lights, draw your curtains, and turn on a fan. Get under the covers and get yourself as comfortable as possible. And if you feel like it, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. And if this is your first night with Slumberlore, welcome. You've found the right place. All right, let's begin. So here's the thing. You've had your period, I've had my period, or if you haven't personally, someone you know and love has had theirs, probably while pretending everything was completely fine and internally calculating whether they could make it to the nearest bathroom in time. It's one of the most universal human experiences in history, and yet, for thousands of years, it was treated like a state secret. Think about that for a moment. Half the population of every civilization that ever existed dealt with this every single month, and we have almost no written records about how they actually managed it. Why? Because the people holding the pens were men, and the men were, frankly, terrified. So what did women actually do? Did they have pads? Did they have tampons? What did an ancient Egyptian woman use when her period arrived in the middle of a workday? What about a woman in ancient Greece, surrounded by the greatest thinkers in history, none of whom had the faintest clue what her body was doing? What did a Roman woman do when she was bleeding, and the men around her were convinced she could rust their swords just by looking at them? How did a medieval peasant woman manage her cycle when the church told her that her cramps were punishment from God, and the best cure anyone could offer was a dried toad worn around her waist? And perhaps the strangest question of all, why did so many ancient civilizations believe that menstrual blood could simultaneously cure diseases and destroy crops? How can one substance be medicine and poison at the same time? Why were men so afraid of something so ordinary? And why, in 4,000 years of recorded history, has almost nobody bothered to ask women what it was actually like? Let's find out. We're starting in ancient Egypt, roughly 1500 BCE. The air is warm, the Nile is rising, and your period has just arrived. You wake up in the dark. The air is already warm. It's always warm here. A thick, heavy kind of heat that wraps around your skin like damp linen. You're lying on a low bed made of woven palm fibre, raised slightly off the mud brick floor on short wooden legs. The room smells faintly of oil, dried flowers, and the lingering sweetness of incense from last night's prayers. Somewhere through the small high window, you can see the first pale light of dawn creeping across the sky. A rooster calls, then another. The village is waking up. But you're already awake. You've been awake for a few minutes, lying still, because you feel it. That familiar dampness beneath you, that heaviness in your lower belly, low and dull, like a fist slowly closing. Your period arrived sometime during the night while you were sleeping, It's here now, and it doesn't care about your plans. You sit up slowly. The thin linen sheet sticks to your skin briefly before falling away. You press a hand to your stomach. The ache is manageable, not the worst you've had, but present. A steady, low hum of discomfort that you know will follow you through the day. You swing your legs off the bed. Your feet touch the cool floor, the only cool surface in the entire house at this hour, and you stand. Your most immediate concern is practical. What do you do about the blood? If you're an Egyptian woman of reasonable means, you reach for papyrus. Not the stiff kind used for writing official documents. That would be wildly uncomfortable and also a terrible waste of a perfectly good administrative record. No, you reach for softened papyrus, the kind that's been soaked in water and worked with the hands until it's pliable, almost cloth-like. You roll it, shape it carefully, and use it as an internal plug. It's one of the earliest recorded forms of what we'd recognise today as a tampon, documented in the Ebers Papyrus, a medical text dating back roughly 3,500 years, the oldest known record of menstrual management in human history, and it's essentially a DIY tampon made from a plant. If papyrus isn't available, you improvise. Soft linen works, folded, layered, tucked into a loincloth that holds it in place against your body. Dried grass works too if you roll it tightly enough. Some women use small cotton pads, others use whatever soft absorbent material they can find. The solutions are as varied as the women using them, and the common thread, no pun intended, is resourcefulness. You work with what you have. You always have. You wash your hands in a clay basin of water near the doorway. The water is tepid, slightly gritty with Nile sediment. You splash some on your face. The heat is already building, even though the sun hasn't fully risen. By midday, the air will shimmer above the rooftops, thick and still. But the physical management of bleeding is only half the story. Because in ancient Egypt, menstruation isn't just a bodily function. It's something more. The Egyptian word for menstruation is hesmen, and it carries a double meaning. It can mean menstruation, the physical process, but it can also mean purification. To the Egyptians, your monthly bleeding isn't dirty or shameful. It's a cleansing. Your body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, releasing what it doesn't need, clearing the way for renewal, making room for what comes next. In fact, menstrual blood in Egypt is considered to have medicinal properties. Some ancient texts describe it being used in healing remedies, mixed into poultices, applied to the skin, incorporated into rituals connected to fertility and regeneration. The goddess Hathor, protector of women, is associated with menstruation. It's part of the sacred cycle. One particularly memorable cure in the medical text suggests smearing menstrual blood on sagging breasts and thighs to restore their firmness. Whether this worked is, shall we say, debatable, but the point is clear. Your blood isn't feared here, it's respected, even valued. In some rituals, menstrual blood is mixed with red wine and consumed to enhance spiritual power. Your body, in this culture, is not a problem to be managed. It's a source of something potent. The Egyptians also see a cosmic connection in your cycle. Your monthly bleeding is linked to the flooding of the Nile, that annual life-giving surge of water that deposits rich black silt across the farmland and makes the entire civilization possible. Both are cycles, both bring renewal, both are messy, powerful, and completely unstoppable. There's something poetic about that. You, bleeding quietly in your mud brick house while a donkey brays outside, are connected to the same rhythms that feed an empire. The same force that makes the wheat grow is the same force moving through you. But poetry doesn't bake bread, and you have work to do today. The grinding stone won't turn itself. The fire needs feeding, and your papyrus tampon isn't going to last all morning. You change it carefully in the privacy of your small back room. You rinse your hands again. You adjust your loincloth, straighten your linen dress, and step outside into the rising heat. The sky is pale gold now, stretching endlessly above the flat rooftops. The air smells of dust and cooking fires and the faint mineral tang of the river. Another day, another cycle. Life goes on. Now let's move forward in time and westward across the Mediterranean. You're in ancient Greece, somewhere around the 5th century BCE. You're a woman in Athens, which means you live in one of the most intellectually advanced civilizations in the world. Philosophy, democracy, art, theatre, this place has it all. Except, of course, rights for women. You don't have those. You can't vote. You can't own property in most cases. You're expected to stay home, manage the household, bear children, and remain largely invisible in public life. Your world is the interior, the courtyard, the kitchen, the weaving room. The sunlight that falls through the doorway of your home is as close to public space as you're expected to get. But you do have your period, and the men in charge, the ones who get to walk freely through the agora and debate the meaning of existence over wine, have some very strong opinions about it. For the practical side of things, Greek women use what's available. The most common method, according to medical texts attributed to Hippocrates, the man we call the father of medicine, is wrapping soft lint around a small piece of wood and inserting it. Yes, you read that correctly. Lint around wood. As a tampon. If that sounds uncomfortable, that's because it almost certainly was. The wood would have been smooth, likely a small stick or dowel, but there's only so much that wrapping it in lint can do. Still, options were limited, and Greek women, like women everywhere and in every era, were nothing if not practical. Some women use sea sponges instead, natural sponges harvested from the Mediterranean, trimmed to size, dampened slightly, inserted, and later rinsed and reused. This is actually a surprisingly sensible solution. Sea sponges are soft, absorbent, and renewable. They conform to the body's shape. They're essentially an ancient menstrual cup minus the cup. Others use linen rags, folded and layered, which the Greeks call phylakea, a word that literally translates to protection against. Protection against what, exactly, is left to interpretation. Staining, probably. Embarrassment, definitely. The judgment of men who think your blood can control the weather? Also possible. But here's where it gets interesting. Because while Greek women are quietly and competently managing their periods with whatever they can find, the men, the philosophers, the doctors, the great thinkers of the age, are losing their minds about it. Greek medicine is built on a theory called humouralism, the idea that your body contains 4 fluids, or humours: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Health means keeping these 4 fluids in balance. Too much of one, too little of another, and you get sick. Women, according to this theory, are colder and wetter than men. Their bodies accumulate excess blood that needs to be expelled monthly. Menstruation, in this view, is a necessary purge, a biological release valve. Without it, the excess blood would build up, gather around the heart, and cause fever, erratic behaviour, violent swearing, and even suicidal thoughts. The Greeks call this condition hysteria, from hystera, the Greek word for womb. That's right, the word hysteria, a term that would be used to dismiss women's emotions for the next 2,000 years, literally comes from the ancient Greek belief that women's wombs were making them insane. The womb was thought to wander around the body, causing problems wherever it went. An actual medical theory, from the people who invented philosophy. So on one hand, the Greeks acknowledge that menstruation is natural and necessary. On the other hand, they've decided it proves that women are fundamentally unstable. Make it make sense. Actually don't. Just settle deeper into your pillow and let's keep going. The word menstruation itself, by the way, comes from the Latin mensis, meaning month, which relates to the Greek mene, meaning moon. The ancients noticed that a woman's cycle roughly matched the lunar cycle, about 28 days, and they concluded that the moon was somehow involved, that menstruation was a cosmic event, tying each woman to the rhythms of the sky, which is either beautiful or terrifying, depending on whether you're the woman or the man watching her from across the room, wondering if she's about to make his crops die. There's no rush. We have all night. Now we cross into the Roman world. You're a woman living in Rome, perhaps in the 1st century CE. The empire stretches across 3 continents. The roads are remarkable. The aqueducts bring fresh water to public fountains in your neighbourhood. The bathhouses are open, the markets are busy, and you've just started your period. You're sitting on the edge of your bed in the early morning. The room is small but tidy. A wooden bed frame, a wool blanket folded at the foot, a clay oil lamp on a shelf that you lit when you woke in the dark. The flame flickers gently, casting warm amber light across the plaster walls. Through the open window you can hear the first sounds of the city waking, the rumble of a cart over cobblestones, the distant shout of a vendor setting up his stall, the low cooing of pigeons on the rooftop. Practically speaking, you reach for wool. Roman women favour small wool tampons, soft, absorbent, and readily available in a society that raises an enormous number of sheep. The wool is cleaned, carded, and shaped into a compact plug. Some women prefer wool pads instead, held in place with cloth undergarments or a linen band tied around the hips. The wool works well. It's warm, it's natural, and it absorbs efficiently. And unlike the Greek method of lint wrapped around wood, it doesn't involve inserting anything rigid into your body, which is a meaningful improvement in the history of menstrual comfort. But wool tampons aren't the interesting part of the Roman period story. The interesting part is what the men believed your blood could do. Pliny the Elder, one of Rome's most famous writers and natural philosophers, devotes an entire section of his encyclopedia, a massive 37-volume work called Natural History, to the supposed powers of menstrual blood. And the list is extraordinary. According to Pliny, your menstrual blood can kill crops. It can rust iron and dull the edge of a sword. It can make wine go sour. It can drive dogs mad if they taste it. It can cause fruit to fall from trees. Bees will abandon their hives in your presence. If you walk through a field while menstruating, the insects will flee. And if an older woman, before menopause, simply looks at someone, she can emit poisonous vapours from her eyes. Read that again slowly. Poisonous. Vapours. Now, before you laugh, actually go ahead and laugh, it's quite funny. Consider what this tells us about how powerful and mysterious menstruation was to Roman men. They couldn't explain it. They couldn't control it. And things that powerful men cannot explain or control tend to get labelled as dangerous. Your blood wasn't just blood. It was a force of nature, terrifying, magical, and completely beyond male comprehension. In a way, that fear was its own kind of respect. They may have been wrong about the poisonous eye vapours, but they were right about one thing. There was something happening inside your body that was beyond their understanding, and that frightened them enormously. But there's a brighter side too. Pliny also noted that a menstruating woman, if she walked nude around a field, could prevent hailstorms and frighten away pests. So in Roman logic, your period made you simultaneously dangerous and useful. Depending on the weather and the state of the crops, you were either a curse or a walking pesticide. How flattering. But not every Roman was so superstitious. In fact, one woman in Roman-controlled Egypt gave us one of history's greatest period-related moments. Her name was Hypatia of Alexandria. She was a philosopher, a mathematician, an astronomer, and by all accounts, an extraordinary mind. She taught at the Great Library of Alexandria and was respected throughout the intellectual world. She was also, according to sources, quite beautiful, and one of her students became obsessed with her. He kept pursuing her, declaring his love, following her around, refusing to take no for an answer. Hypatia had sworn never to marry. Her spouse was science, her devotion was to knowledge, and she had no interest in this student's romantic attentions. So when he wouldn't stop, she did something remarkable. She took one of her used menstrual rags and threw it at him. "This is what you really desire," she reportedly told him. "There is nothing beautiful about it." The student, horrified and humiliated, left and never bothered her again. There's something deeply satisfying about that story. A woman, 15 centuries ago, using her period as a weapon against a man who wouldn't respect her boundaries. In a world where menstrual blood was feared as a destructive force, she weaponized that fear deliberately, precisely and brilliantly. Some things never change, and some solutions are timeless. Take a breath. We're getting to the good part. Now we move into medieval Europe. You're a woman in England, perhaps in the 13th or 14th century. The world has changed a great deal since ancient Egypt, but your period hasn't. It arrives the same way it always has, on its own schedule, indifferent to your plans, unconcerned with your convenience. You're lying in a small room. The walls are rough plaster over timber, uneven and slightly damp in places where the rain has worked its way through. A single candle flickers on a wooden shelf, casting long, unsteady shadows that stretch and shrink across the low ceiling like slow breathing. The air smells of wood smoke and tallow, and the faint earthy dampness of a house that is never fully dry. Outside, the village is quiet. Rain drips softly from the thatch, a steady, patient rhythm, like the ticking of a clock that hasn't been invented yet. You pull the wool blanket closer around your shoulders. It's rough against your skin, but it's warm, and warm is enough. You feel the familiar ache in your lower back, a dull heat spreading slowly across your pelvis, the heaviness below, the slight nausea that comes and goes like a wave. You press a hand against your stomach and breathe slowly. Another month, another cycle. You've been doing this since you were 12 or 13, though you don't remember the exact age. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody celebrated it. Your mother simply handed you a folded rag, showed you what to do, and told you this was part of being a woman now. That was all. It just happened, and you managed, and life continued. What do you reach for? In medieval Europe, the most common solution is cloth, linen rags, folded and layered, worn between the legs and held in place by your undergarments. This is where the phrase "on the rag" comes from, a term that survived for centuries because the practice survived for centuries. The rags are washed after each use, soaked in cold water first, then scrubbed, then hung to dry in whatever private space you can find, because displaying them openly would be unthinkable. If you're fortunate enough to live near boggy terrain, you might also have access to bog moss, a naturally absorbent material that works remarkably well as a pad, soaking up blood efficiently and discarded easily afterward. But not everyone can afford rags or moss. For the poorest women, and there are many of them, the solution is simpler and grimmer. You bleed into your clothes. There is no alternative. You wash what you can, when you can, and carry on. The stains don't fully come out. They never do. But nobody talks about it. To deal with the smell, some women carry small bundles of sweet-smelling herbs, nutmeg, lavender, dried rosemary, crumbled flower petals, tied in a cloth and hung from a belt or tucked into a pocket. A nosegay, they call it. A small, fragrant shield against what cannot be hidden. But the medieval period brings something new and heavy to the experience of menstruation. Something that goes beyond the practical and settles deep into the bones of how women see themselves. Religion. The church teaches that menstruation is a punishment. Specifically, it's a punishment for the sin of Eve. When Eve ate the fruit in the Garden of Eden, God cursed her and all her daughters with painful childbirth. Over time, this curse was extended to include menstruation itself. Every cramp, every ache, every spot of blood on your clothing. This is Eve's fault. Your fault, by extension, for being born a woman, for existing in a body that does what bodies do. Because cramps were considered divine punishment. Pain relief wasn't readily offered. The church saw suffering as part of the deal. If God wanted you to hurt, who was a physician to interfere? Who was a herbalist to soften what was meant to be endured? Some women turned to herbal remedies anyway. Mugwort, pennyroyal, chamomile, willow bark. Quietly, privately, without drawing the attention of priests or neighbours. These weren't medicines in any official sense. They were passed between women, mother to daughter, friend to friend, whispered in kitchens and gardens, a parallel medical tradition that existed entirely outside the male-dominated world of physicians and clerics. One particularly memorable medieval cure involved burning a dried toad, grinding the remains into powder, and wearing the ashes in a small pouch around your waist. Whether this helped with cramps is unclear. It almost certainly didn't help with the smell. Another remedy suggested drinking the powdered hoof of a donkey mixed in wine. The medieval approach to women's health was, at best, creative. At worst, it was a donkey hoof in a glass of wine. Menstrual blood in medieval Europe was feared in ways that echoed Rome but added layers of religious dread. People believed it could dull mirrors, rust swords, kill plants, and sicken anyone nearby. If a couple had intercourse during the woman's period, the resulting child was expected to be weak, sickly, deformed, and red-haired. Apologies to everyone with red hair. This was not based on evidence. Very little in medieval medicine was. A menstruating woman could not take Holy Communion. She should not enter the church. Her very presence was considered a kind of contamination, spiritual as much as physical. And yet, interestingly, nuns who fasted heavily often stopped menstruating entirely, a result of severe calorie restriction that we now understand as amenorrhea. Medieval thinkers, however, interpreted this differently. They saw it as proof that holiness could reverse Eve's curse. If a woman prayed hard enough, lived purely enough, denied her body thoroughly enough, she could transcend her own biology. She could stop bleeding. She could become, in their eyes, clean. There is something quietly devastating about that. The idea that a woman's natural body was a problem to be solved through starvation and prayer. That bleeding was a moral failing rather than a biological process. That the only clean woman was one who had starved herself into silence. We know better now. But for centuries, women lived inside that belief. They carried it with them, the way they carried the herbs and the rags and the quiet discomfort that nobody was supposed to talk about. Let's slow down for a moment. Settle in. The hard part is behind us. But Europe and the Mediterranean weren't the only places where women were navigating their cycles. Across the world, in every civilization on every continent, women were finding ways. Let's drift further afield for a moment. There's no hurry. In ancient Japan, women used tightly rolled paper as tampons, held in place with cloth bandages wrapped around the hips. These paper tampons needed to be changed frequently, as many as 10 or 12 times a day, which tells you something about both the absorbency of paper and the determination of the women using it. 10 times a day, every day for several days each month. It was fiddly, inconvenient and constant, but it worked. And they made it work, the same way women everywhere made everything work. Quietly, without fuss, without anyone documenting their ingenuity. In ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, one of the oldest civilizations on Earth, we find some of the earliest medical texts referencing menstrual management. Babylonian clay tablets from roughly 4,000 years ago describe the use of wool tampons, And here's the remarkable part. Some of those wool tampons were infused with cannabis. That's right, ancient pain-killing tampons. Wool soaked in cannabis preparations inserted to ease menstrual cramps from the inside. 4,000 years ago, women in Babylon had a more effective pain relief system than medieval European women did 2,000 years later. Let that sink in. The progress of history is not always forward. Saffron was also prescribed for period pain in Mesopotamia, and modern science has actually confirmed that saffron can reduce symptoms of PMS. The Babylonians also recommended henbane, a plant with mild sedative properties, for particularly bad cramps. Sometimes the ancients didn't just get it right, they got it right before anyone else even asked the question. In equatorial Africa, women used grass mats and rolled grass as absorbent materials, natural, biodegradable and freely available. In ancient India, the arrival of a girl's first period was, in some cultures, celebrated. She was treated as a goddess, honoured as having reached a sacred threshold. The monsoon rains in certain regions were even described as the goddess's own menstruation, a natural, life-giving force to be respected, not feared. In Borneo, the Rungus people managed menstruation by positioning themselves over gaps in the slatted bamboo floors of their elevated homes, allowing the blood to fall through to the forest floor below. This was done casually, without stigma, without ceremony, without shame. Just a practical solution in a culture that viewed menstruation as neither sacred nor cursed. Just a thing that happened. Just a part of life. As one anthropologist described it, a very casual process. There's something comforting in that. The idea that somewhere in history, in some quiet corner of the world, women bled and nobody made a fuss about it. No magic, no curses, no dried toad powder, no poisonous eye vapours. Just life, carrying on the way it always has. But not every culture was so relaxed about it. In Mayan civilization, in what is now Central America, menstruation was woven deep into mythology. The Mayan moon goddess represented womanhood, sexuality, and fertility. According to Mayan belief, menstruation itself originated as a punishment. The moon goddess had broken the rules of cosmic alliance by sleeping with the sun god, and her blood was the consequence. That blood was then collected in 13 jars, where it transformed into snakes, insects, poison, and disease. But also, and this is the part that makes Mayan mythology so fascinating, it could transform into medicinal plants. Healing and harm, held in the same vessel. The same blood that could breed serpents could also grow the herbs that cured you. There's a strange kind of balance in that, even if it came wrapped in punishment. And if we go even further back past the civilizations, past the cities, past the written word entirely, we reach the Stone Age. Women in prehistoric times, as far back as 30,000 years ago, had periods too. Evidence suggests they had fewer of them, because pregnancy and breastfeeding occupied much of their adult lives, and poor nutrition often delayed the onset of menstruation. But the periods they did have still needed managing. Archaeological speculation, and it is speculation because nothing organic survives that long, suggests that Stone Age women may have used animal hides, soft moss, dried grasses, and other natural materials as rudimentary pads. They had no medical texts, no philosophers about humours, no religious doctrines about curses. They simply had their bodies, doing what bodies do, in a world that hadn't yet learned to be afraid of it. Imagine that for a moment. A woman, tens of thousands of years ago, sitting at the mouth of a cave, watching the sun set over a landscape that no modern human would recognise. The air smells of pine and rain-washed stone. Somewhere nearby a fire crackles softly, sending thin smoke into the darkening sky. Her body aches. Her belly is heavy. She reaches for a handful of dried moss, presses it between her legs, and settles back against the rock. No one tells her she's cursed. No one tells her she's unclean. No one tells her anything at all. The stars come out, one by one, and she watches them the way women have always watched stars, quietly, patiently, waiting for the ache to pass. Now, settle in. We're almost done. One of the strangest things about the history of menstruation is how little of it was recorded. For something that happened to roughly half the population, every month, for thousands and thousands of years, the written record is almost empty. And the reason is simple. The people writing things down were men, and men didn't experience it, didn't fully understand it, and in many cases didn't want to think about it unless they could frame it as magic or danger or divine punishment. We know fragments. We know about the papyrus tampons because one medical text survived. We know about the wool because physicians mentioned it in passing. We know about the lint-wrapped wood because Hippocrates referenced it in a treatise that was mostly about other things. But the daily reality, the washing of the rags, the quiet discomfort, the private management of something that happened every month without fail, none of that was considered worth recording. Historians estimate that women in the ancient world actually had fewer periods than women today. Pregnancy was more frequent. Breastfeeding lasted longer, sometimes 2 or 3 years, which naturally suppressed menstruation. Diets were poorer, which sometimes delayed the onset of periods or reduced their frequency. Menopause may have arrived earlier. Aristotle noted it beginning as early as 40. So the total number of periods a woman experienced in her lifetime was likely much lower than the modern average of roughly 450. But it was still a constant, still something that needed managing, still something that shaped the rhythm of daily life in ways that nobody thought to write down. The products women used, the moss, the papyrus, the wool, the grass, the rags, were organic materials. They've decomposed. They've returned to the earth. We don't find menstrual rags in archaeological digs because cloth rots. We don't find papyrus tampons because papyrus dissolves. We don't find grass pads because grass is grass. The physical evidence has disappeared, leaving us with fragments of text, oblique references in medical manuscripts, and a great deal of educated guessing. And perhaps that silence tells us something too, that women have always managed, have always adapted, have always found ways to handle what their bodies did, with whatever was available, often without acknowledgement, often without help, and almost always without complaint. Not because there was nothing to complain about, but because there was no one listening. And even if someone was, they probably would have suggested a dried toad. So here you are, lying in the dark, in your modern bed, with your modern comforts. The sheets are soft, softer than anything an Egyptian queen ever slept on, softer than the finest Roman linen, softer than anything any woman in history has ever felt against her skin at the end of a long day. The pillow is just right. The mattress holds you the way water holds a stone at the bottom of a river, gently, completely, without effort. If you need pain relief tonight, it's in the bathroom cabinet. Small, white, effective, and available in roughly 30 seconds. If you need a heating pad, it's within reach. If you need chocolate, well, hopefully there's some downstairs. And if not, there's always tomorrow. The shops will be open. The chocolate will be there. Nobody will suggest you wear a toad around your waist. But somewhere in the back of your mind, maybe you're thinking about the Egyptian woman, standing in the warm dust of a morning 3,000 years ago, fashioning a tampon from softened papyrus and stepping out into the rising heat, carrying the same ache you carry, feeling the same heaviness, managing the same body, with different tools and different beliefs, but the same quiet determination. Or the Greek woman, rinsing a sea sponge in a clay bowl of water, wringing it out, setting it aside to dry in the shade, quietly, privately, without anyone watching, without anyone writing it down, or the Babylonian woman reaching for a wool plug infused with cannabis, pressing it against the cramps, finding relief in a remedy that would take the rest of the world 4,000 years to rediscover. Lying back on her bed in ancient Mesopotamia, feeling the pain ease, watching the lamplight flicker across the ceiling of her room. Not so different from you, really. Not so different at all. Or the medieval woman, carrying her nosegay of dried herbs, bleeding into linen rags, washing them in cold water by candlelight, told by the church that her pain was a punishment and her blood was a curse, told that she was unclean, told that her body was a problem to be prayed away, and yet still getting up in the morning, still baking the bread, still tending the fire, still carrying on the way women have always carried on, through every era, in every civilization, in every corner of the world, without fanfare, without recognition, without the men who wrote the history books ever thinking to ask how. There is a quiet kind of strength in that, not the strength of swords or empires or grand declarations carved into stone, just the steady, persistent, unremarkable strength of getting through the day, of managing what your body does without asking permission, of finding solutions where none were offered, of carrying on, cycle after cycle, century after century, in a world that pretended it wasn't happening. The candle has burned low now, just embers, glowing faintly in the dark like the last warm breath of a fire that's ready to sleep. The room is still. Outside, the world is quiet. The kind of quiet that only exists very late at night, when the noise of the day has finally let go and there's nothing left but the sound of your own breathing and the slow, steady beat of your heart. If you listen carefully, you can hear the rain, not heavy rain, just a soft, patient drizzle, the kind that falls without effort, the kind that turns the world outside into something gentle and blurred and far away. Your eyes are heavy. Your body has settled into the bed like water settling into a riverbed, finding its shape, finding its place, letting go of everything it carried today. The warmth of the blanket is around you, like arms. The darkness behind your eyelids is soft, not empty. It's the kind of darkness that holds you, the kind you can rest inside. Your breathing has found its rhythm, slow and deep, like tides pulling in and out, in and out. Each breath takes you a little further from the day, a little further from the noise, a little closer to sleep. And somewhere, deep in the bones of history, 1,000 generations of women are resting too. They carried what they carried. They managed what they managed. They bled and they cleaned and they carried on, and they never once asked for applause. They've earned their rest, and so have you. Let your eyes close, not because you decided to, just because they're ready. And for tonight, that's enough. Thank you for spending tonight with Slumberlore. If this helped you relax, a like would mean a lot, but only if you genuinely enjoyed it. And if you'd like to fall asleep here again tomorrow, subscribing means I'll be here waiting. If you know someone who struggles to sleep at night, sharing this might just change their evening. Sweet dreams, everyone. I'll see you next time.